Hello and welcome to the Mind Body Soil podcast, a podcast where we explore the innate connection between the mind, the body and the soil. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Smart Soil. Smart Soil is an online education platform creating courses and providing resources from farmers for farmers. Join us as we share the stories and experiences from those dedicated to regenerating ecosystems, communities and human beings. Today we are joined with the master of pasture cropping, Colin Seis. G'day, Colin.
Hi, how are you going?
Good, mate. If you'd like to start off, just maybe position us whereabouts you're farming, and then we'll dive into your history a little bit, mate.
Yeah, the property here is in sort of central New South Wales, about 300 kilometres northwest of Sydney. We've been here, I've been here all my life, basically born here, and always lived on the place here. So, but the family have been here on the country here since the 1860s. So we've been here for a while.
Wow, see, you've seen this place change dramatically then in your time span.
In my time span, yes. My father adopted, as many people did from the 1940s on, he adopted industrial agriculture, which in those days it was called subsuper, subterranean clover, superphosphate, that sort of thing. There wasn't actually really a name on it, but now I'd like to call it the industrial agriculture. So I grew up with that, and I also saw the crash of that. It worked extremely well for my father for 20 odd years, 25 years or more, and then it started to collapse, as in crash. What we didn't know, or my father was, I was probably too young, but it started to become less and less productive, more and more disease problems with sheep, insect attack, all of those types of things, weeds, and no one could really give any answer what was happening. Now we know why. Certainly no one knew at the time, but now we know that the farm ecosystem had collapsed. And it had collapsed because of the agricultural methods that were adopted, which were the best at the time. My father was following the best scientific advice at the time, but that turned out to be wrong, and the whole farm collapsed, as many farms are, or certainly did and are all around the world.
Still happening today, hey, Colin. We still, agriculture is still very isolationist. We segregate everything up and divide and conquer and like you say, just separated ourselves from nature. So, what was if going back a bit further before your father started adopting industrial methods, how was it done back then?
In my great-grandparents' time, they came into the property here, in the area here, into a grassland, into a pristine grassland. And credit always has to be given to the previous management of that. And that previous management was 40, 50, 60,000 years of Aboriginal land management. And they actually managed this country extraordinarily well. And you don't survive for 60 or more thousand years unless you do something right. 100%. In fact, we've stuffed this country and this planet in 200 years.
And what do you see the main driver of that being, Cole? In terms of, if you could, point your finger. I know there's a lot of things, but what would you say that the main issue has been?
I think the main thing is human greed, and what drives that, or what we as a species are doing in relation to greed. And a lot of, in regard to agriculture, a lot of that drives the industrial agriculture model, and lies and corruption and all types of things in that sense, in that farmers around the world are convinced, or they are convinced by multinational companies that are selling products to farmers to use these products, and it turns out that they've been very, very destructive.
I mean, not just to the land, but also to the human health as well, Colin, and animal health.
Very much so. Human health is a major problem, and again, a lot of that's driven by the way we farm. Pollution, of course, all of that as well, but certainly the way we farm, and a lot of the human health issues are coming from for poor nutrient in our food, poor nutrients in our food, or low nutrients in our food, which is driven directly by poor soil health.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I look forward to diving into that a bit more down the road. But what we're trying to do here is just paint a bit of a broad picture with a big brush, and just try and see how we've got into this mess that we're in, because I mean it isn't slowing down. The destruction has ramped up of our natural capital, and that's why I'm so excited to be talking to you, because you've actually created a method which is starting to restore ecosystems, and it can still be productive. So I'd love to dive in just briefly about pasture cropping and how that came about and what it is.
Yep. How it came about was, when was it? 30 years ago now, just about, in the 1992, whatever. Yeah, that is 30 years. So, good friend of mine, Darryl Clough, and I, we were always sharing ideas, and I'd started zero tilling at that time. We both had, Darryl Clough, a good friend of mine, and he and I both started zero tilling. It was really one of the forerunners of I guess, zero tilling now, direct drilling and zero tilling, but using large amounts of herbicide, killing everything as recommended, and interestingly, nothing much has changed in relation to conventional agriculture, industrial agriculture. So we started looking at ways we could do it differently, and I was always very interested in native grasses and native grasslands, and I could see that what I was doing was just using herbicides to kill everything that was on the property, and including those native grass species, or the few remaining ones that were left on this property. And that was a great driver for the change in the way that I was starting to sow crops. And anyone adopting pasture cropping, it should be what they focus on first also. It's something that's almost always overlooked, because we tend to always look at yield, like crop yields, but there's more to yields than just filling up a bin full of wheat. And if we destroy our farm and our farm ecosystem in the process, really, we're not getting any yield at all. Not really, because we're not going to survive on the property. I did an interview with some people yesterday, a webinar, and they were talking about resilience. And I told them that, and something I've spoken about for a long time, in resilience and regenerative, it's on the same page. But if what you're doing now can't be done for 100 years or 500 years or even 1,000 years, it is not resilient, and it's certainly not regenerative. It's not regenerating our farms or our landscape or our planet. So if we can't do it for 1,000 years, we shouldn't do it at all, because it will collapse on us. It'll collapse. It has to. And if we keep doing it for 1,000 years, we probably won't have a planet to live on. So that's the first question we need to ask ourselves. Can I continue to do this indefinitely? And if the answer is yes, well, go hard, keep going with what you're doing. There's not only one answer to this. I developed the pasture cropping methods, which addresses a lot of this, but there's other methods as well. Certainly never overlook good grazing management, and that really that's been covered in the course you've done with Judy Earle. So grazing management is a major player and a very, very important part of the whole picture on how to restore our farms.
Absolutely, Cole, and it works hand in hand with pasture cropping. I mean, if you're still pasture cropping and you're not grazing your animals correctly and not managing your animals correctly, you're still going to degrade the landscape. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, that is correct. And we can look at it the other way. If we're grazing really well, but still either ploughing or using really destructive herbicides and high quantities of herbicides and fertilizer to grow crops in a mixed farming enterprise, that won't work either. So we need to put at least those two together. And there's other really good ideas and things out there too, which can be adopted as well. So what I'm saying here is the more of these regenerative type farming practices we can put together on one property, the better we will be.
Awesome. That's a great take on it. And so it's not just a one method suits all sort of thing. It's, grab a bit of this, grab a bit of that, and see what works in your context.
Yep. In doing that, we need to make sure that they are compatible together, and that's important. And that also can be related to enterprise stacking on properties, in that they need to be ecologically compatible and financially compatible, each enterprise or each thing that we're doing.
100%. I'd just love to hear your most basic description or definition of what pasture cropping is, Cole.
Yep. Pasture cropping is actually about, or at least the original concept was about sowing, as in zero tilling, crops into perennial pastures, or in my case, perennial grasslands, while those grasses, or while the majority of those grasses were in their dormant state. And here on this property, and a lot of, especially, well, a lot of Australia actually have a majority, or did have originally, majority of warm season grasses, C4 grasses that go dormant in the winter. And that's a perfect niche for planting or zero tilling a crop into those while they're in their dormant state. A lot of misconceptions about pasture cropping, that it is a solely organic system. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. The key to it is to look after and protect and preserve the native grasses you have on your place, the perennial grasses you have on your place, on the properties, and whatever we do, don't kill those. And that really is the key to it. What we found when really early in the development of pasture cropping here, one of the first things I saw is the of grasses, perennial native grasses, coming up or growing in the drill row where the oat crop was sown. They were growing from seeds that were in the soil, and those seeds in the soil could have been in the soil for decades, 50, 60, even maybe 100 years. And one of the things that's totally overlooked with pasture cropping is that it's one of the fastest ways of restoring a grassland that we know. It will stimulate the germination of seeds in the soil. Obviously, you need to have those seed in the soil, but if an area was a grassland at some time, there will be seed there, unless it's been totally nuked with pesticides and been cropped for the last 50 or 60 years, then there may not be a lot of Love to see there.
That's remarkable. So, and what sort of timeline then are you seeing properties turn around once they're adopting pasture cropping? I know it's context and climate specific, but what as a ballpark?
Often, as from reports and seeing properties change, you'll start to get change often in 1 year, in the first year, and that change is often related to those small seedlings emerging where the crop was sown the following season, but generally about 3 years. And that depends too on how good the grazing management is. Like, for example, if you get growth of young perennial grasslands plants and then graze it really poorly and lose them, well, that's is a problem. So what I'm saying here, as we said again, the good grazing management and pasture cropping should be going together.
Yes, absolutely, mate. And that's super exciting for any farmer, really. I mean, 3 years is really it may seem like an eternity for some people when they're with the system they're in, but I mean, that's remarkable.
When I first started here, in 1992, and I really had no idea what I was doing because no one had ever done this before. And everyone thought I was a lunatic anyway, anyone that I told it. So I learned very quickly not to tell anyone what I was doing. So now we got recruitment of perennial grass seedlings very, very, very rapidly. And I only started here, and fortunately we did have a pretty good idea of what grass species we had on the place, and there were only nine species on the property, and 60% weeds, and that was about 10% roughly of native grasses. So there was one plant here and another one 20 yards away, and so I did not start with a grassland, and that's the important thing for people to understand. You don't have to start with grasslands. You start with whatever you've got, wherever you're at, and just start managing for things. Now, the grassland now, it just keeps evolving and changing. At last count, we had 60 species of native grassland species, and the property now is over 80% native grassland. And we basically started with a property full of weeds. So, and that's directly related to pasture cropping and grazing management, holistic grazing management. That's the only things that changed it.
What a turnaround. That's bloody amazing, mate. And I'd like to dive into some of the benefits of, I mean, we talk about perennial and native grasses, but what are some of the benefits of having these plants there?
Okay. Resilience to start with. I was talking about native grasses and grasslands. Before I go any further, it doesn't have to be native. It doesn't have to be a native grassland, but it does need to function like a grassland. And that's important. Before I go into explaining where I started from. In other words, it should have warm season grasses, cool season grasses, and a great mix of forbs and herbs in it. And now those forbs and herbs can be clover and lucerne, plantain and chicory, for example, which are introduced into this country, into Australia. They can have cool season grasses introduced, as in fescue, phalaris, those introduced grasses, and some warm season introduced grasses like digits and some of the panics and that. So in other words, we've got a species mix in there which functions like a grassland, and that can be useful in areas where the native grass species have been lost. However, we can restore grasslands, as I did here, with management, especially if you do have an odd species on the property, and if you want to go more into a native grassland, also you can add species as well, add native species using the pasture cropping techniques. So, so that's an important thing to understand. Now, I think where we're up to before that, the advantages of a grassland, and I'll talk about a native one here. Grasslands all around the world originally, and this is in this country over 200 years ago, in other countries like the US 300 years ago, and in Europe, well, 1,000 years ago. But the grasslands all over the world had great diversity in them. For example, the grasslands in Australia had over 300 species in them. The American grasslands had at least that, and the African grasslands had at least that. So huge diversity of species, and that really is the key to a lot of things. If we're going to have a farm that is not only productive and profitable, but also limit the amount of animal disease, pests, all of those things. If we have a plant species diversity, will just about solve all of those problems, as well as fixing our soils. So restoring a grassland is really a vital thing to do. It's the thing I talk about most. And when I'm doing on-farm consulting work, which I do quite a lot of, that's the main thing I focus on with people, is how do we restore this farm that we're looking at, and what we can work with, what's here, what plants are here that we can increase and expand on. And I guess the pasture cropping course covers a fair bit of that as well, on how we can actually do that.
Absolutely. And so then how much in that consulting work, when you're working with new farmers on farm, how much is mindset involved in making that change? You know, is that a big barrier to change?
It is a big barrier. But it has been up until a point. What I see a lot of when I go on farms and people are really struggling. They're struggling emotionally, and financially as well. But the big problem is mental. And go on to property centre, the people on the farms are really, really stressed and struggling with it because everything's going wrong. And one of the greatest joys I get is helping people, then going back, like getting them started and giving them some direction in what to do without any cost or very little cost. That's a great help to them too, because just about anyone you speak to as farm advisor wants to sell you something. That's the last thing I do, because they usually don't need to buy anything anyway. And so it's about regenerating their farm that way, very naturally, but kickstarting it. So it needs kickstarting, but very little money needs to be spent, and certainly not initially. Part of the problem is they've already spent too much money on different things. So, and go back in 2 or 3 years' time, and their whole mental attitude has totally changed. They've got different direction, and now, well, they have got direction, and they're starting to see changes, and they're becoming positive themselves, and that's a big and very, very important thing.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm very interested in that area, Colin, and hence the name of this podcast. I mean, Mind, Body, Soil, because we really feel, and with our experience so far, I mean, if you have a happy farmer, they're not stressed, they're going to make better management decisions, and a lot of the time, their farm will actually reflect the health or that vibrancy in the farmer.
Yep.
Like what you're referring to here. So if the farmer's super stressed, they're under a lot of pressure, they're obviously not going to make informed decisions. They're going to be in that fight or flight state almost, and their farm usually reflects that. So that's super interesting. And if we can do that and build the resilience in farmers as well as the farm itself, I mean, that's a huge win.
Yeah. It definitely works. There's no doubt about that. Giving people some direction and hope is very important. And one of the things too, like often struggling financially, and there's a few different ways of generating income. And one of them is not to spend the money. I mean, it seems fairly obvious, but cut your costs out. And you now, the way we farm with the industrial model, everything goes out the gate. Money, we're spending money left, right, and centre. And now, worldwide, fertiliser and pesticide, all that stuff is almost doubled in price for whatever reason. That's not going to help at all. These farmers that are really locked into that form of agriculture. So to be able to reduce their costs dramatically actually produces more income for them.
Yeah, so a lot of that, I guess the financial incentive then with these regenerative farmers, I mean, is like what you're saying here is that their costs are lower, therefore their returns or what they're getting for their investment or their crop yields, I mean, is better. So it's not necessarily they're getting a premium, but there's less cost going off the farm.
That's exactly right. Yes. And that's, I often describe that in a way. If, for example, and I used to talk about this years ago when people was talking about using in bags of wheat, but if for example, it costs half a tonne of wheat to grow a 2 tonne crop, or say, we make it simple. If it costs a tonne of wheat to grow a 2 tonne crop, you may as well only be producing a 1 tonne crop, because that's the only profit you're getting.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really quite simple. There's nothing complicated about any of this stuff.
Yeah. That's what we need to do, isn't it? Is really to strip things back and get to make it simple again, because I mean, and there is a lot of complexity involved. You can go down many rabbit holes trying to figure out, like what Ian Haggerty says, trying to figure out what's going on or how it's getting that extra N or extra P into that crop. But really, if it's happening and you're seeing the benefit and you're not having to, burn a hole through the wallet to get that result, I mean, just keep doing it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's a lot simpler than when we think. Like, what we're doing with this really is just simply following what old Mother Nature had originally designed for us. We're just following a natural system. So the closer we can mimic that, the easier. And this is also a personal thing with me. This is what I found. The closer I got to the property running as a natural system, the easier the work became, a lot less work, and the more profitable it became. And it seems impossible. And that's some of the reason why people doubt regenerative agriculture stuff, in that a lot of it is too simple. But natural systems are hugely complex, but we don't need to worry about that. We don't, as long as it's working, we don't need to really understand why, and we'll never work out why anyway, as long as it does. And it can be quite simple. It can be as easy as getting out of the way and let Mother Nature drive it for us. Stop interfering. Okay, we can still steer it and help and assist natural systems, but stop trying to get in the way of it all the time.
and control it. That's
Yeah.
that's the fact that there's a blueprint there in how it should look and how it should run. I mean,
Yes.
people should get out and have a look at some native grasslands or some perennial
Yeah.
grasslands if they can find any nowadays. I mean, your place is
Yeah.
probably one of the only ones around, but no, definitely not. But there's still some that exist.
Yeah.
But observing nature and learning from nature, I guess, it's
Yeah.
all there for us, isn't it?
That's right. We don't need to write anything else on agriculture. I mean, the blueprint's already written, and just follow natural system.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's simple.
And I guess a lot of the criticism that will come, when you start talking about this to farmers that are in that industrial paradigm, will be, well, that's great on a hobby farm or a smaller farm scenario, but you can't scale these methods. What would you say about scaling pasture cropping or scaling natural systems?
It's very easy to do. Of course, you can scale it. The whole planet was a natural system until we interfered with it. So how big do you want it to be? So the and we've only got to look at it and Diet Haggerty with the work they're doing. They've got huge acreage. I'm working with a couple of thousand acres here, but there's a lot of people with big acreage, and they're often the people that are on a bigger scale seem to actually do it faster, because I guess they've got many of those that have been in agriculture for a while. Once their heads change, grab it and run with it, because they know how to grow things. Those fellows, those people that have been growing crops or that, they know how to grow plants. They also have got a pretty good handle on grazing and general livestock management. So it's not a big hurdle, not as big a hurdle as people think it is to change. And that's also part of the transition. How do we change? And how do we change without going broke, obviously? And how do we transition? And we do it slowly over time. And all this can be relatively easy, or very easy.
And what's one of the biggest mistakes that you see with people transitioning? Or are they trying to go too big too quickly? Or are they trying to go cold turkey? Or what's the most common thing that you see?
The most common thing is go too quickly. Or the thing that really worries me most of all is someone on a farm that says to me, tomorrow I want to be organic. Now, there's nothing wrong with being organic, but when you look at, and often I'm on their place, helping them with the change, and you go on the place and there's weeds everywhere and blackberries and all sorts of things that you think, oh, gee, these people are setting themselves up to 1,000 years of work. I mean, we need to be practical in this. It's so good to be organic, but if we transition into it, set yourself a goal of 5 years or 10, even 10 years, and then moving towards organic. Like, I could be organic on this property now. I don't really want to be, because I don't want to limit anything that I do. But I use very little chemicals on this place. It could easily be organic. But gee, I wouldn't have wanted to have tried it 30 years ago. It would have been a really big struggle. Instead of the whole thing being really, really easy, I would have made it very difficult for myself.
Okay, that's good to know. I mean, and for those listening, I mean, take your time. There's enough people out there that have done it. Find the others and ask questions. I mean, I feel like a lot of the breakdown in, like I said at the start, how agriculture has become quite isolated in the sense. I mean, we live in an age of connectivity, yet people feel more isolated than ever. So if you can get to know the community or who else is doing things and go look with your own eyes, ask for advice, I mean, it's a big step forward, isn't it?
Yes, that's exactly right. Some of the most successful groups that I've worked with have been mentoring programs, and generally work with a group of people, and keeping a group of people together their heads are on the same page is a really good idea. In that they're attempting something that's to change to something that's different. So they've got a support base within themselves, and they can discuss their successes and failures. And not only that, one of the big problems that I see with people that want to do things differently is the pressure from fellow farmers, other farmers, or agronomy people, or whoever. They'll basically try and talk them out of what they're doing. Now, one of the advantages is if they're in a group, then they're a bunch of lunatics together and they can support each other. I mean, really, so it doesn't. So they've got protection from those outside negative influences.
Bloody oath, mate. And that's one thing I've seen that's been really positive with the pasture cropping community that has started to form. Obviously, you've been in this space for a lot longer, but it's been really cool to see the pasture cropping community through the Smart Soil programs come together. And I'm really excited to see from here that the grazing management community from Judy's course and the pasture cropping course all come together and start to share their wins and losses. Because as you said at the start, I mean, if you're pasture cropping and you're doing everything correctly, but you're not grazing well, then you're just going backwards again. So I'm really excited for what's going to come of that in the future years and months. And just to have these conversations. I mean, we plan on not just talking about agriculture, but talking to people that help with mindset change and well-being for farmers, because we feel like it's a tough time to be a farmer. I mean, there's a lot of change. It's not getting easier in the environment that we're working in. So it just comes back to what you said in resilience. I think, we have to become resilient as farmers, and we have to build robust, resilient ecosystems on our farms.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And I guess the farmer themselves, it really is part of that whole farm ecosystem, if you want to look at it. But if we look at this, that whole ecosystem, the farm one, soil, plants, and everything all working together, that is really the ultimate goal that we should be aiming for. And really, a lot of this, and I said earlier, is not hard at all. It's actually really, really quite simple. It's almost too simple, some of this stuff. And one of the good things about it is actually can be very enjoyable. And it's another thing that I see. People start to enjoy farming again. Like once they change and get direction, happy about what they're doing. And then even start to, we've seen, hang on, I'll just backtrack. We've seen a decline in young people leaving the land, going off and doing other things instead of staying on the farm. Again, it's driven a fair bit by the industrial form of agriculture. Why would you want to be in that? So this is actually creating all sorts of opportunities for people to stay on the land. You can create different additional enterprises on farms now that weren't possible before.
Absolutely. And I think it's becoming attractive again, like you say, to the younger generation, to my generation and younger. We're all looking to come back to the land, because I think it's one of the most important things that we can do. Because, I mean, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, but farming correctly can be one of the greatest agents for change. I mean, for the challenges we face in terms of climate and variation going forward. So I'd just like to unpack it a little bit and go into, if we build a native grassland or a perennial grassland and it's functioning like an ecosystem, what are some of those ecological benefits that we start to see?
Yeah, and they're huge. The main thing is, if we just broaden that out a bit, we see a lot of ecological benefits that actually save us money. And that is, we start to get things like less or no insect attack in crops and pastures. We don't have earth mites damaging pastures and crops, for example. And that's because it's driven by the diversity of insects in the pasture, together with increased bird life. That's certainly been a big thing that's happened on the property here. Huge amounts of birds now, different diversity. I've been not get off track. The other things too, when our farms start functioning as ecosystems, soils start to improve, soil carbon levels definitely do increase. But interestingly, soil nutrient levels increase. Now, that's supposed to be impossible, but it definitely isn't. And we've shown that here with the huge amount of data that we've collected. But that's been reported now with many, many farmers around the world about increasing soil nutrients without putting fertiliser on. So another huge benefit in savings in fertiliser inputs. For example, here there hasn't been any phosphorus fertiliser put on pastures for over 40 years. We haven't used insecticide for well over 25 years, and haven't used seed like an insecticide a fungicide on seed dressings, like with our oats and wheat and those. We don't use those anymore. So our farms functioning as ecosystems is more than just feeling good. It starts to become very, very profitable in that we have these huge savings that add up to a lot of extra profit. And for example, here on this property, and I haven't calculated it now for a few years, I should do it again, but the savings every year now compared to when I was practicing industrial agriculture is $80,000 I don't spend every year. Now, at the moment, well, especially if I put in the this year's fertiliser prices, that's probably $120,000 or $150,000 I don't spend every year. Plus, that's not even counting labour savings. There's a lot less work on property now. So I don't have to really make that much money at all. It's all in savings, really. It's not about chasing dollars anymore.
Yeah, and not just that, but I mean, if that's $120,000 worth of chemical that you're not putting out into the paddock, I mean, that's not going into the ecosystem either, you know, or into the atmosphere. It's so it's a win for everyone.
Yeah, and not going into the human food sources as well.
Absolutely.
So I mean,
it's a no-brainer, isn't it? What is everyone doing?
It actually is, and I get asked. I get asked that quite a bit. How come everyone isn't doing this, especially someone that's new to agriculture? How come everyone isn't doing it? Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome, mate. I'd like to just change gears a little bit and go into some of the into the native grasses specifically that you have out in your property there. I mean, you got some warrego grass. There's some pretty cool studies happening, and just a little bit of the traditional use of how the Gamilaroi people used it, and just like to go explore that wherever you want to start and wherever you want to go with it.
Okay. I've always had, well, not always, at least for the last 30 years anyway, had a real interest in trying to understand what our Aboriginal people used a lot of these species for, and a lot of things, and the seed in the grasslands. And I was aware of that because on the property here, I found a grinding stone, like for grinding. With the round stone plus the grinding with it. So obviously Aboriginal people made a flatbread out of the seed. So anyway, the opportunity came. I kept on running into brick walls in trying to find information because no one had any. So I was very excited about the opportunity to be involved with the Sydney University and the Aboriginal Gamilaroi people at Narrabri, which is about 3 hours north of where I am here. So what I did to support that is just gave them some seed of species that I thought would have been possible to have been a seed for grinding into flour or using for human consumption. And one of them was warrigo that you mentioned, and the other one is green summergrass. So they're small round seed. We can harvest them relatively easily and get a clean sample from it. And it's interesting that there's some very interesting information coming out of that research work. It's been slowed down with the coronavirus and restrictions and all that, but there's some very interesting work come out of it. And the Aboriginal Gamilaroi ladies have had Johnny Cake baking days and trying to work out what they can bake out of a lot of this and come up with some really interesting stuff. So there's a lot of potential in that direction, and to a point where I've got to do a webinar with Black Duck Foods on Monday, actually. Well, not a webinar, it's more of an information sharing thing. It's not an educational thing. So Black Duck Foods, and they're an Aboriginal-run organisation, and Bruce Pascoe is very much a big driver in that organisation. They were also working closely with Sydney University and the Gamilaroi Aboriginal people as well at Narrabri. Narrabri is actually, when I mention Narrabri, it's a research centre that's owned by Sydney University. So, which I missed that important point earlier. So, and what Black Duck Foods are doing, and I don't know the full story yet. I'll know more on Monday, but I do know that they're wanting to create and expand the native food industry, or create that, but certainly want to keep it close and managed and run by their own Aboriginal people, which is a fair enough and good thing. So that's starting to move reasonably quickly now. That the potential in grassland species being used as a food source, and why not? It's been used for 50, 60, 70, whatever, thousands of years. So of course we can drive that, and interestingly, we've been looking for plants that are perennial plants that produce grain. I mean, the research centres in the US have been working on this for a while, and they've been trying to breed plants, wheat plants or not wheat plants, perennial plants that produce grain. But Aboriginal people were doing that this here for tens of thousands of years ago. I mean, we don't need to breed a new one. We've already got all these plants.
Then you can't patent it though, Colin.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. Yeah. Yep.
Gee whiz. So what do you see being the major hurdles in scaling these native foods then, Cole? I think I just realised, I just thought of the name of the main organisation in the US, which is the Land Institute, which is a world famous institute at Salina in Kansas. So that's where a lot of that work was done, or is being done. Anyway, so what was your question again? Sorry. I was just wondering, what do you see the main hurdles being in scaling native foods or native grasses? I mean, is it more farmers growing them? Is it harvesting? Is it processing?
Yeah, it is all about, well, all of those things. We certainly, if we start to create a food industry, which is what the ultimate aim really is, we will start. We'll need a lot of seed. So there is potential out there for again, restoring grasslands, which incorporate a lot of these better quality type seed, and then supplying a potential market into the future, like the food industry one, but it might happen quicker than we think. There's a lot of interest from bakers in these products. A lot of that's still experimental. We're trying to work out what the Aboriginal uses of them were, and obviously the Aboriginal people do have quite a lot of that information, but some of it's been lost as well. Harvesting on a really, really big scale probably needs to be looked at. We can clean the seed. That's not a big problem. There's not enough seed cleaning technology out there to do that. So there's not a lot of as far as harvesting, cleaning, all of that. There's not a lot of development needed in that. We can adapt what we've got from the conventional grain industry. I guess the main work is needed in how we can prepare these products. And I'll give you an example of that. I was playing around with some of these seeds quite a few years ago and grinding them and trying to bake something out of them and made this inedible paste and tried to cook it. And the conclusion I came to was just because Aboriginal people ate these things for 50,000 years doesn't mean to say that they taste any good. So we need some help from bakers and chefs and all of that to make them fit our European palate, I guess. So,
absolutely. Well, they're always going to taste a little bit different to the old Wonder White, aren't they?
Yep. But no, seriously, there is a lot of potential in them. And some of the seed, the flour smells really good, like really nice smelling flour that comes from this seed. So you've got to be able to make something taste good from that. But that sort of work. But that's really exciting stuff, and it'll happen quickly, I think now. And that was partly why that I was involved in the founding of Stipe Native Grasses 25 or more years ago. Native Grass Association was to try to not only preserve our native grasslands, but also find other uses and start to look at some of the Aboriginal uses of it. And I've been thinking about this for a long time.
I think it's so exciting, Colin, to be moving in that direction because, like you said, the Land Institute have been working away at trying to find a more perennial style agriculture like they had in the prairies back then. Yep. And why not? I mean, the grasses are adapted. They are drought resistant and more resilient. Yep. They're deeper rooted. I think there's huge upside. And
yep. But yeah, in my opinion, this is only my opinion, I think the Land Institute went the wrong direction in that they attempt to breed a new plant instead of looking at what they had in their grasslands. Out of the American prairies, and I have seen there's very little left, but some of the remnants that are left, incredibly diverse prairies and grasslands. Like, for example, sunflower is a native of is a form in their grassland. Sorghum, sorghum's African, but there's a lot of there's a lot of species in the American grassland they could have looked at, I believe. And again, they probably should have asked the Native American people. Really,
that'd make sense, wouldn't it?
As we're asking Australian Native people.
Yes, no, they have to be included and to be leading it. For it to get anywhere, that's if we can regain their trust, I mean, it's pretty horrible what's happened both over there and what we've done here. So, I mean, we've got to, that's awesome, Cole. Well, mate, I don't know where to go next, but I mean, what are you working on at the moment? What's next for you and where are you putting your energy?
Actually, at the moment, I'm developing and manufacturing a native seed harvester, another one, because our orders for seed now are increasing so rapidly that I wanted to make something a bit more efficient. What we were harvesting with was a bit slow and wasn't really efficient enough. So, we've got probably almost 2,000 acres here. Well, there is 2,000 acres of native grassland that we can harvest. So we need to be able to just make sure we get, as high quantities as we can from it. And so I just wanted to develop this harvester for this season, so we can do that. And prior to that, I made a seed cleaner. The main reason that I did this myself, like you can buy seed cleaners, but at $50,000, I really didn't want to buy one. So I just, I'll make my own, which is what I did. And the same thing with the harvester. I just, I didn't want to spend a huge amount of money, so I just decided to fire up the welder and made it myself.
And you're lucky, your cousin's pretty handy as well, isn't he?
He's pretty handy as well. Yep. So if I need any metal folded or do any of that sort of stuff, I get him to do it. Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic. Bloody awesome, Colin, and really excited for the next chapters for us as well. I know that we're going to be working on some more specific educational resources for the native grass industry, harvesting, cleaning. So all the listeners out there, look forward to that. We've also got updates coming into the pasture cropping course, which is existing at the moment. Getting close to 100 pasture cropping farmers that are partaking in that course. So very exciting. I'm sure we'll be having another webinar soon. And just excited to keep continuing this conversation around farmer well-being and farmer health and ecosystem health and where that intersection is. So have you got any last words, Cole, that you want to add into today, mate? Anything you want to put out?
No. Well, other than we maybe should mention that we're looking at doing a short grassland course. Yes. Yes, on grasslands, but that'll come up in the future.
Absolutely.
In more detail. That and I guess that was sort of really the main thing that I was thinking of.
And Colin, we forgot to plug your book, mate.
Yeah, that's still published. Holy moly!
Oh no!
Whole thing's edited. I think the cover's done. Things that I think.
It'll be out soon, right? Everyone's hanging for
it. Yep, that was one of the most frustrating things. Yeah, the book was easier to write compared to this publishing of it.
Absolutely, mate.
It's all been edited. Everything's ready to roll.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Oh, well, bloody awesome. Thank you so much, Colin, for your time today. And till we chat again.
Yep, very good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.